Hi and welcome to my video. Today I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This is the first book by Toni Morrison that I've read, and I'm definitely going to read more of her stuff now, but I read this in September and this book stuck with me. It hit me hard. It stuck with me for a long time afterwards, and it's taken me a long time to dissect what it is that hit me so hard and how I really feel about the book. Because when I first read it, I was like, oh, did I like that? What's going on? Because I felt miserable and confused, and I had so many mixed feelings after reading this book. It's a tragic story, it's harrowing, but it was more than that. So I thought it'd be a nice idea just to spend some time reviewing it and just talking about why this book matters so much to me and why it had such an impact on me. And also because I don't think this has been given its just deserve a little bit on BookTube. I've seen quite a few people read this book earlier in the year, especially after George Floyd, and I think it's great that people are branching out and trying to read more literature by people of colour, by black people, but I feel like a lot of people read it and had it in their wrap-ups, were like, yeah, great, 4 stars, whatever, and then moved on, but no one's really talked about what this book actually does. So I wanted to. So I was thinking about how do I review it? Do I talk through the story, then say what I liked or disliked, which I did with Queenie, but it's hard because it's all interwoven. So I'm just gonna shit out my thoughts, basically. I just don't have a more eloquent way to put it, and just see how this goes. I'm going to try not to look at my notes. I have notes written. I had to get it all out on paper first, and I ended up writing quite an extensive review on Goodreads, so if you want a coherent version of what I'm going to say now, you can check that out. So The Bluest Eye is a book that made me think really, really hard, and when I finished it, I was reading it like in bed at night, and I finished it and I put it down, and I felt like so confused. I had such a mix of feelings. I couldn't put into words whether I liked this book or not, and what this book meant to me and why it made me feel so strongly. I felt upset, I felt heard but not heard, I felt mixed, and I was like, I need to put it down. So I put it down, and I left like a really brief like review on Goodreads about this book says so much that I can't put it into words, and I had to think about it. And after a few weeks of processing it and unpicking my thoughts, I guess, I've realised that I didn't enjoy the book, but that's not because it isn't brilliant, because it is. It's 100% brilliant. It's a well-written, amazing book. I didn't enjoy it because it hurt. Because I felt hurt reading this story. I was hurting for Pecola, who's the main character in the story. She's who the story's about, even though there's multiple narratives, but it's all about her essentially. But I felt hurt for her, I felt hurt for her family, I felt hurt for myself, and I felt like my sore spots had been prodded at a little bit, and yeah, and for that, that's the reason why I didn't enjoy it. But this book, because of that as well, this book means a lot to me, and it has so many multiple layers or themes that I can only touch on a few right now. I could spend hours picking them all, dissecting every character, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to talk about the bits that mattered to me. So the story of The Bluest Eye is told through multiple narrative voices, but there's an overarching narrator who is Claudia, who is a young person who sort of befriends Pecola, kind of, in the story, but it's Pecola herself who is desperate to have blue eyes, which is why it's called The Bluest Eyes. Pecola herself hardly features in the story. So let me read a little bit from the back. So Toni Morrison's debut novel immerses us in the tragic, torn lives of a poor black family, Pauline and Charlie, which is mum and dad, Sam, which is brother, and Pecola, in post-depression 1940s Ohio. Unlovely and unloved, Pecola prays each night for blue eyes, like those of her privileged white schoolfellows. At once intimate and expansive, unsparing in its truth-telling, The Bluest Eye shows how the past savagely defines the present. So that's what it says on the back. So that's what it is. So the story is about Pecola and her desire to have blue eyes and how she feels so ugly. But actually what we get is the story of Claudia, of Pecola's parents, their history, and how their lives shaped themselves, how their past shaped themselves, and how it shaped how they behaved with Pecola, and how that shaped her as a person. Which is a really interesting way to sort of develop a character, but also show their demise, because it's a harrowing story, and it's essentially the story of Pecola's breakdown. She herself only has a small section where we have her actual perspective. The rest of it is told from other characters' perspectives and their experiences, and sometimes not even referencing her directly, but it's just about essentially intergenerational trauma and racism and standards of beauty. So the book is narrated by Claudia at the beginning, who tells the story of the people in Pecola's life and how their own tragedies I can't speak today, and how their own tragedies and trauma and pain have incidentally caused the mental and emotional breaking of Pecola. It's a story of racial hate, of intergenerational trauma, as I already said, of toxic and harmful perceptions of beauty, and loss and friendship and pain and pity, and how we internalise these messages that we're given, and how the messages shared by society, such as standards of beauty, which have labelled, in the past at least, and still present, but let's not get into that, but have labelled blackness as ugly and poor and worthless, and how these messages that are shared, how we internalise them, and how they can be extremely destructive. I got a quote from Toni from the foreword in her book, and she says, "When I began writing The Bluest Eye, I was interested in something else, not resistance to the contempt of other, ways to deflect it, but the far more tragic and disabling consequences of accepting rejection as legitimate, as self-evident." What she says there is basically the story. It's about how internalised the ugliness of Pecola is. Everyone thinks Pecola is ugly, where her family thinks she's ugly. They think they're ugly. She has this belief about herself without a shadow of a doubt. And it's not just ugly in terms of look, it's ugly in terms of everything. She thinks she's not intelligent. There's so much about her that is wrong. Everything is thought of as being wrong. But in reality, she's not. She's not ugly. She's just a child. But as a character, she represents blackness and poverty and trauma and everything that is the opposite that society wants from people or expects from people. So because of that, she has internalised these values. Her family have internalised these values. The whole community has internalised the values that everyone sees her as ugly because she wears the cloak of ugliness, which is actually another quote, which I will read out in a bit. And this belief has been passed down to her, which is where the sort of intergenerational part of the trauma is, that her parents' own experiences of prejudice and racism and trauma and loss and pain have passed down to her. So their belief of their ugliness and their blackness and their poverty is now hers, because they can't possibly meet the standards of beauty and of what society expects of them in the time, because that is whiteness, where whiteness is seen as wholesomeness, like milk, which is something referenced quite a lot in the book. There's another quote from the book that I want to read. It says, "It was as though some mysterious all-knowing master had given each one a cloak of ugliness to wear, and they accepted it without question." And that's referring to Pecola's family, to her parents, her brother and herself. And that's what's happened. It's society that's given them that cloak. It's the trauma that's been passed down. And yeah, it's very clever. I appreciate is that she's Toni Morrison, but she takes racial contempt and this internalized view of black people of colour, and she dramatises it and she blows it up, and she gives this extreme example with this family, with Pecola, with her experience of abuse and everything, and creates a narrative that is really painful to read and hard to read, but it's still relatable. By dramatising it, it becomes somehow easier to swallow, because it's so big. This example that she's used, by doing so, is somehow easier to swallow because you can clearly see what is happening. And somehow it becomes relatable, and Pecola is basically just corrupt. She just represents corrupted innocence, and what mattered to me, why it stuck with me so much, was that I can really relate to that experience of ugliness, of feeling ugly, or feeling like you've been labelled as something that's less than or not worthy as other people, just because of my blackness or my identity. And it's something that, like, that's the bit where I said it was poking my sore spots because I could really relate to it, and I just wanted to save Pecola. I wanted to tell her that she's beautiful as she is, but that's not what happens. Even for the most hateful characters, for example, Pecola's dad, Cholly, he's abusive towards her. So this book does come with a huge trigger warning. There is a lot of child abuse in it. But he's a perpetrator of her abuse. He's her father and her abuser. But Tony, by sharing his story and how he's come to be, she doesn't justify any of his actions, but she does elicit empathy, because his way of being is learned from the trauma he's experienced and the racial abuse he's experienced and how society has perceived him. So by sharing her family's trauma and story, we begin to understand like how this has come to be, how everything has come to be, and it's just done really well. The ending is something that I want to talk about as well, but I don't want to spoil it if you haven't. But it's not really a spoiler, it's kind of mentioned at the start, but it's a bit of a spoiler, so if you don't want to, just skip ahead like a minute or a couple minutes, because I just want to quickly mention the ending. For me, the ending was really profound, because it wasn't a happy ending. In the end, Pecola she drops into psychosis, but she starts talking to herself a lot, and she hears a voice, but she believes she has blue eyes. So rather than it being like, oh, she learns to love herself and her beauty and who she is, it's not a happy ending because it's not that simple or that easy. And actually she ends up, her mental health just deteriorates, and she ends up believing that she has blue eyes. But this is bittersweet, because in believing that, she finds peace and happiness and escape from her troubles by believing that she's beautiful, believing that everyone looks at her now and sees her as this beautiful thing, which they don't, and their attitudes towards her haven't changed, but she believes they have. She finds peace, and that's like the happiest ending she could have. So even though it's not like she's rescued from her abusive home, and she's not like, she learns to love herself, because that wouldn't happen. They're a poor family in 1940s America. They're a black family. It wouldn't happen. Her only peace and escape was by losing herself, and believing that she has blue eyes provides her solace from all the pain and suffering that she goes through day to day. I just thought that was like the most devastatingly beautiful ending. It's so poetic and sad, and I feel so sad for her. The point of the story is not that beauty is something that's given to you. It's not an affliction. You're not afflicted with beauty or lack of beauty. It's not something that we possess. It's something that we have with our actions, with our words, with our homes, our environment, with our family. It's something that isn't given to us. It's not purely external. It's everything. It's the things we do, the things we think. It's the things we are, the things we want to be. That's what beauty is, and that's what she's trying to say. It's the sort of a quote that she has. Beauty was not simply something to behold. It was something one could do. And that's just like, yeah, that's the point. The point is that beauty goes beyond our perception of beauty. You go beyond physical appearance. It's learned, and it's put onto us and taken off us, and yeah, it's a powerful story, and it's just, there's so many layers. I really like I could just literally analyse everyone in it, but that isn't the point. The point isn't to analyse every character. It's just a powerful story, and for me it was 5 stars because it made me think so much, because it really touched the parts of myself that have been hurt by this standard of beauty, that I felt invisible and ugly and all these things, and I just, and how much I really cared about Pecola and her family and everyone in that community and everything that's wrong in the world. I think it's a really important and amazing read. It just like blew my mind. It felt important to me. So that's my review of The Bluest Eye. I definitely encourage people to check it out. There's so much, I know I've spoken a lot about it, but there's so much more to it than everything I've been able to say. so please check it out. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for listening to me ramble, and I hope you have good happy reading times, and I'll see you around.